So, if you like to impress your friends or your teammates with your almost encyclopedic knowledge on Nike boots, this video is a bit of a, scratch that, it is a total must-watch. Because today I'm diving deep into the Nike history books to take a look at what I feel at least is some of the biggest innovations from Nike since 1971. And as you can see, it turns out there's quite a lot. I can't even keep them in my hand. So, let's go. But we kick things off where it all began for Nike, with the Nike. Now, back in 1971, Blue Ribbon Sports, as Nike were called back then, commissioned a Mexican shoe factory to build them their very first football boot. Now, the fun thing was that it wasn't exactly a boot that Nike had developed, it was just a standard model that the shoe factory already sold to other people. But Nike then also slapped a swoosh on the side. And I know it's not exactly high innovation, but the swoosh is so iconic that Nike football boots really wouldn't be Nike football boots without it. So innovation-wise, but it's important. Then a lot of years went by where Nike didn't really excel. Up until 1994 at least, where they introduced the Tiempo, and then 2 years later in 1996, they also introduced a football boot called the Air Rio Zoom, which introduced their revolutionary Zoom Air pods in football as well, in order to give you better cushioning and energy return like was so popular in running and basketball and tennis. And initially, the Air Rio Zoom didn't catch on that much, but Nike kept using the Zoom Air pods in the Air GX, in the Air Brasilia, and the T90 Tiempo lines all the way up until 2008, where the technology was given a bit of a break. But there's no way we can talk innovation without also talking Mercurial, with the first one seeing the light of day in late 1997 and being released in 1998. But actually, this wasn't called Mercurial at first, it was supposed to be a continuation of the Tiempo line called the Tiempo Ultra Light, and it was just jam-packed with innovation that no one back then had ever seen before. So not only did Nike use the world's first synthetic leather upper on a boot called KNG 100, they also had this sticky grip coating, and they also managed to almost halve the thickness of the outsole, which of course had full emphasis on speed, not only with the stock configuration but also in terms of weight. Now back then it weighed 250 grams, which in 1998 was really respectable. And actually Nike managed to shave that down to 240 grams when they introduced the Mercurial 2 and later this one, the 2.1, in early 2000. The Mercurial is innovation, especially with the colorway. I mean, back then it was outrageous, but it was also really innovative. And it paved the way for basically every wild colorway we've seen since. In 2001 then, Nike gave us the Air Zoom Mercurial VT, which was basically a matched Mercurial upper sitting on top of an outsole with quite a lot of innovation in it. So it had Zoom Air pods in the forefoot and then this really interesting Versatract outsole with 13 molded and 6 detachable studs, meaning that it was, as far as I know, the first mixed stud outsole out there. And while it wasn't necessarily the best back then, it was a little bit chunky and weighed a ton, well, it's also one of the early precursors to what we know as SG Pro today. It was a good idea, just need a bit more time to execute. Then, 4 years later, Nike took the speed boot game to a whole new level with the launch of the Mercurial Vapor One. Now, it was built on the idea of having a track spike for the football pitch. So Nike went in and closely considered every gram and even built a new last, so a new shape for the boot, to bring it as close to the foot as possible. They also made a new one-piece synthetic upper called Nike Skin, which was very thin to give you the most barefoot-like experience possible. And finally, they had this P-Bax plate with a much more aggressive stock configuration to make it even more responsive than the two previous Mercurials. And back then, having a football boot so advanced that even weighed just below 200 grams was something no one had seen before. Then in 2007, Nike introduced this bad boy, the T90 Laser, which took over from the Air Zoom Total 93. And yes, this is the remake. But anyways, after finding that 69% of all goals were scored with the instep, Nike engineered the shot shield with these rubber fins and an asymmetrical lacing to clean up the striking surface in an attempt to remove many of the variables when you take a shot, and also, of course, to give you more power in your strike. But apart from that, it had this T90 upper, it had zoomer in the outsole, and it also had this pretty innovative event mesh in the upper to prevent smelly feet. Oh, and it weighed 232 grams. Not that anyone cares. But in 2008, Nike then released the mothership of all concept boots, the Mercurial SL. See, when the new Nike CEO Mark Parker took over in 2006, he challenged the Nike football team to create a football boot without any design or budget limitations, and the result is the Mercurial SL, with an almost full carbon fiber upper and this full-length carbon fiber tooling to increase the responsiveness and that snappy feel when you push off. And okay, maybe it wasn't the best in terms of comfort or performance, but just like any other important innovation before and after for that matter, you'll be seeing a lot more carbon fiber in football boots after 2008. So it mattered a lot. And it was cool, I mean. But the Nike innovation train kept going. And in 2009, they brought out the Mercurial Vapor Superfly. And I know, it doesn't look the best. I was young and thought it would be cool to black it out, which it clearly wasn't. But the Superfly one brought Flywire to the table, which are these thin but also super strong Vectron threads that are woven into the upper to allow Nike to give you this almost suspension bridge-like construction to give some stability to your foot, but also allow them to really shave the upper as thin as possible to give you a barefoot-like feel and save some weight. Now, the Superfly weighed 185 grams, and Flywire really set the tone and gave some inspiration for the use of Brio cables and high-tenacity yarns that we'd see further down the line. Now, playing-wise, I don't think was the most comfortable boot to wear, and the first colorway had some durability issues, but from an innovation point of view, there were a lot of cool ideas in this, and it's important. But 2010 also showed us that not all innovation is amazing. Because on the Superfly 2, Nike introduced more Flywire into the upper, which made it even stiffer than before. So great job, Nike. And also, they introduced the marvelous, the magnificent, the super highly innovative Nike Sense studs, which were these two mechanical studs under the forefoot that were supposed at least to move a couple of millimeters into the ground when you apply pressure on these little two pins or nibbles or whatever on the insole. And I know the marketing material told this story of claws coming out of the boot into the ground, and it all was a bit ridiculous. Honestly, it was what we Danes would call a storm in a glass of water. Cool story, bro, but it didn't really do anything. But then in 2012, Nike released a greener football boot, or at least a football boot with a smaller environmental footprint called the Green Speed. It was also a concept boot only made in 2012 pairs, but it came with an upper and an outsole and materials made out of mostly renewable and recycled materials. For instance, the insole is made more or less entirely out of castor beans. So a pretty fun concept, and also it was, at the time, Nike's lightest boot they'd ever made. Now personally, I've never worn one, but I'm told that it wasn't the best Nike boot ever. But on the other hand, it was one of the best looking Nike boots ever. But later in 2012, Nike decided that it was time to tackle Mother Nature, which is a bit of a big task. But they introduced ACC, also known as All Conditions Control, across all of their silos. And it was basically an upper treatment that allowed Nike to give you a more consistent level of touch, more consistent control in all conditions, in all weather types. All Conditions Control. And I know that some people say that it was a gimmick because Nike have never really told people what it is and what it looks like and how it's done, but it's still around after 11 years. And I actually tested it back then with a ACC Vapor and a non-ACC Vaporade. And I found that you got a little bit more of a consistent sticky grip when the boots were wet compared to when you didn't have ACC. So no one really knows what it is, but I actually reckon that it works. But after many years of T90s and striking elements, Nike reinvented themselves in 2013 and replaced the T90 line with the Hypervenom Phantom, which went in the complete other direction and introduced this mesh-based, super thin honeycomb-like upper, which was not only stupidly comfortable, but also offered a very barefoot-like feeling on the ball. And they also introduced a more agility-focused tooling. Now, this upper here was called Nike Skin, so the same name as on the Vapor One, which was a little bit confusing, but it was still a really, really good upper. Now, of course, we also got this split toe design on the outsole, but honestly, I never really felt that it made a difference in terms of my toe-off agility or anything like that. But the upper, phenomenal. And it wasn't even high innovation, it just worked. And then in early 2014, Nike introduced us to what you could argue at least is one of the biggest and most important innovations in the last 15 years. Flyknit. Because Flyknit allowed Nike to, well, it was a new way of thinking football boots. It allowed them to engineer the boots exactly how they wanted to engineer them. So if they were prototyping and found out that something was wrong, they just changed the knit pattern and, well, made it right. And it was a whole new experience to wear a knitted boot like this. And also, of course, it introduced the world to a new silhouette with this more sock-like dynamic fit color. And I think it's fair to say that you know when innovation works, when 5, almost 10 years after, more or less every other brand out there is working with knit and is working with sock boots. Then in 2015, Nike introduced a heat-activated upper on the last ever colorway of the Hypervenom Phantom 1. It was called Transform because it essentially allowed the upper to transform from this plain black look into a more almost reptile-looking orange glowy look when the upper was activated by the heat from your feet or your hands or, well, basically everything else that could give heat to it. Was it useful? Not really. Was it cool though? Yeah, it was very cool. And later in 2015, Nike decided to fuse their finest, most pure, untreated Allegria leather with their elite boots, meaning that you would get this soft touch, the elegance of some of the best leather you could find on a pair of football boots, coupled with the performance benefits of a Mercurial and a Magista and a Hypervenom. And the first couple of Techcroft versions, they were glorious. They were absolutely magnificent. The leather quality was through the roof. Then Nike kind of screwed it up on a couple of later versions. Techcroft 2.0 wasn't very good on the Vapor 11, but thankfully Nike made amends and, well, now Techcroft, it's good again. And it's been good for a while. But these are unrivaled. Woo. But after years of rigorous testing in the Nike Innovation Kitchen, the Swash brought us anti-clog in 2016, which is this outsole technology that has a coating which means that it becomes lubricious when it's activated by water, meaning that it becomes really smooth so that mud and dirt and grass just slides right off instead of getting stuck between the studs and clogging up the boot. And essentially that leads to you getting better traction and also the boot weighing less because you're not carrying around 2, 3 to 20 kilos of mud. And the funny thing is that it just works. Then the Vapor 11 and the Superfly 5 brought about the anatomical outsole. The year is 2016, when Nike designed this outsole to mimic the natural shape and curves of the footbed, essentially to give you the feeling, at least, that you were able to sink into the outsole and feel more closely connected to the boot. And I'll be honest, the first couple of times I wore it, I got intense foot cramps. But once my feet and my brain got used to the feeling, it did indeed feel as if you were sinking into the boot and becoming more at one with the tooling. And I actually ended up really liking it. Brilliant innovation. Then in 2017, Nike gave us a glimpse into the future of knit with this bad boy, the Flyknit Ultra. An amazing football boot, but also it introduced this technology where Nike, they played around with how you traditionally coat knit. Normally you would just have the knit and then you would slap a full piece of thin silicone film on top to cover it up. But here Nike played with like a gradual silicone coating and also what seemed like on the ribs here to have individually coated yarns to give a bit more of a gritty surface. And as I said, it was a great football boot, but it also really started the journey towards what you know today as GripKnit. Now, they never actually made my size in this. This is half a size too big. And I'm still mad, Nike. I'm still so mad. And then in the year of 2018, Nike replaced the Hypervenom Phantom line with the Phantom Vision, which introduced us to the brilliance of quad fit. And it's kinda hard to show you because it's a part of the liner on the boot. It's this white mesh that sits almost as a sock on the inside of the knitted upper, which basically consists of these fibers that during normal movement are really soft and flexible, very comfortable, but which then harden up almost like a seatbelt during aggressive movements such as accelerations or changes of direction. And that means that you basically get that secure lockdown when you need it, but apart from that, it's just a super soft, very flexible and comfortable experience. And it was great. On top of that, also the Vision gave us the ghost laces, which is a way of hiding the laces away to clean up the striking surface. And that was cool and all, but it also meant that, actually tying your boots was a bit of a nightmare. Then in 2019, Nike continued the learnings from the quad fit mesh and gave us this, which is basically an upper consisting of a mix of Flyknit yarns and then these stronger, more stable high tenacity yarns, which allowed the upper to not only be really soft and comfortable and flexible, but also to have a certain amount of stability, which allowed Nike to hold your foot in place even during aggressive movements. And it also meant that both the Vapor 13 and Superfly 7 were just gloriously comfortable while also still performing really well. So maybe Flywire back in the day wasn't it, but it led to this, which was great. Then 2020 and the Phantom GT brought us the generative texture, which was this textured upper with lots of little textured bumps in a pattern that was actually generated by computer software to create the most optimal specific zones for different types of touches and passes and shots. It was a really good story, and I'll be honest, the textured upper was really nice on the ball. But given the fact that Nike then ditched the generative texture generated by a computer for a more, generic all-over kind of texture on the GT2, maybe the generative texture was more of a good story rather than actual high innovation. But the funny thing is that two of the latest innovations from the Nike brand are actually both rooted in earlier tech and earlier ideas. So in 2022, of course, Nike launched the Concept Boot Air Zoom Ultra, which had this full-length Zoom Air unit from the KD12 basketball shoe. And that was later refined into the more football-specific 3/4 length Zoom unit in the Mercurial, which was a bit more snappy and responsive than the Zoom Air units from the past, to make it a bit more speedy and a bit more modern. And then Nike's latest innovation came in December 2022, which is the upper on the Phantom GX called GripKnit. And basically GripKnit is a continuation of the technology that we saw on the Flyknit Ultra, where Nike went in and gave us a combination of individually coated yarns and then these uncoated high tenacity yarns from the Superfly 7, which created this very interesting mix with an upper that is not only super soft, but is also incredibly sticky and grippy in this almost spiderweb-like way that offers a completely new feel of grip and texture on the ball. And maybe you can actually argue that GripKnit is one of the more effective Nike innovations through time, because not only has it changed the way you can work with knit on a football boot, it also just straight up works. It does what it promises. So those were 20 plus of the biggest innovations from Nike in my book ever since they started with football in 1971. And if you're still with me, you're a little bit of a hero. Even the boots are falling now. They're leaving me. But anyways, I obviously think that the early Mercurials are very important, but for me, the biggest innovation has to be Flyknit, because of what it's meant for football boots. And maybe also anti-clock, because it just works. But guys, what do you think is the biggest, most important innovation from Nike? Let me know, of course, in the comment section as always, right down below. And if you need new football boots, well, check the link to Unisport right over there. And if you like to learn new skills, well, if I could, I would point to the playlist in the corner right down as well. And with those words, I guess I'll have to pick up some boots. I'm signing off. Cheerio.